Good morning, TEFS 702. This is week 1 recording. Please just give me a minute so that I can share my screen with you. Okay. I think there we go. So as I've said, this is semester 2, week 1. Remember the last week we did the introduction and welcome and introduction. So this is week 1. Strategies for teaching English language. So this is what we are going to focus on this week. And then remember, you have a Menti quiz to do for us. And the quiz is basically about how are you feeling today. You still have till the 8th of August to complete that. So please get going with it as soon as possible. Let me know how you are feeling. And then how are you feeling at the start of semester 2? I hope better than the start of semester 1. So that's actually the ideal situation. So that's the Kahoot quiz. Now, I just want you to take note what we did so far during the year. So when it comes to CAPS, which is something you should be familiar with now, the CAPS document, that will be your life as an English teacher. The learning outcomes for languages are the following. It would be listening and speaking. Okay, so listening and speaking, remember we did a lot about that last semester, and this will be for a variety of purposes, for a variety of audiences and contexts. And the second one is, and then the second thing we did during as a language outcome, as a learning outcome for languages would be your reading and viewing. And this would be for understanding and evaluating critical and a range of text. Okay. Now this semester, we're going to focus on language. And I mean, I can say this to you, it will be more on language structures, which will include grammar, and conventions appropriate and effective. So we're going to look at in terms of what is expected from you as a first additional language senior phase teacher in terms of languages, how to teach it, how to look at grammar, for example. And then we're also going to look at a little bit at writing and presentation. So we want you to write for a range of purposes and audiences using various conventions and formats. So these two, the ones that you see, number 3 and number 4, will be what we will be focusing on this semester. Now, in this unit, so this is unit 1 for this semester, we're going to look at teaching language structure and use in the home language as well as the first additional language classrooms. I mean, your focus should only be first additional language, but I've noticed that a lot of you some of you have home language also as an English method. So what are we looking at? Identifying the importance of teaching language structure and use. So what is language structure? We're going to look at that a little bit more later on. Remember, language structure you'll find in Ferreira, that's chapter 13, so please have a look at it. And then, I mean, this is just an example of us using incorrect grammatical structures. For example, we'll say grammar give many problems. And obviously we know that's incorrect. So how are we going to apply, how are we going to teach these types of problems? You know, a grammatical problem like this. So we're going to look at applying integrated grammar teaching strategies. And that we're going to delve on quite a bit because it's going to be part of your first assignment, your SS1 assignment, so you need to listen up. So number 1 will be we're going to apply integrated grammar teaching strategies. Then we will be selecting or designing effective and appropriate resources for integrated language teaching, including grammar games and other techniques. In a nutshell, what that says is that we are going to look at the resources available so that we can actually teach grammar in an appropriate way for your learners. Lastly, we're going to look at accessing language structure and use. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. Just a reminder again about the textbooks that you need. You need obviously the Ferreira book, that's very important. Then also you need the CAPS document. That's also there. It's on Canvas, so you'll find it there. And then the last one, the recommended reading would be Killen. And Killen is the one that will, that's just recommended as an additional resource. Now, CAPS language teaching and learning principles. What is it? Okay. Firstly, I think by now we will understand that our module is very much text-based. You cannot, language learning is text-based. So what does that mean? It means that language is taught in an integrated manner. It cannot be taught in isolation. Let's go further. Language learning is mediated and scaffolded. So what does mediated and scaffolded means? It means that you as a teacher will assist the student. You will scaffold it. You will integrate ways and means where you assist the learner to actually understand language teaching. And then learning is learner-centered. Remember, we're big on explaining to you that it's big importance for us explaining to you that learner-centered means there must be the discussions must come from the learners. It must be communicative. So in other words, they must be able to talk to themselves in the classroom, talk to their peers in the classroom, and it must be inductive. And inductive, we've done quite a bit of that it must be a discovery. It cannot just be taught to them directly. So okay, so let me rather go up. It cannot be isolated grammar. It cannot be. So in other words, you cannot ask the students to define the past tense. That's not going to work. Or you cannot use an example where you ask the students, now rewrite the sentence into the past tense. They're not going to learn anything by it because it's an isolated grammar activity. Remember that we said grammar needs to take place within a text-based environment. So text-based would be either it will be an article from a newspaper where there might be a visual involved, or it could be a poem, or it could be an advertisement. As long as there's a text involved, you know, and it's not isolated sentences. That's what we're trying to get to you. And that is what SS1 is going to be a lot about. So identify your language learning teaching styles. Are you one of those? I mean, that stands in front and the students raise their hands. Yeah, some of them, I think there's a place for this. Or are you a language teacher that will let your students sit around in the classroom and then they talk to each other? I think I prefer that style because that style allows for language learning to be communicative as well as inductive. It's also more learner-centered. You definitely do not want a situation where the teacher talks and you are sitting there and bored as hell. And then the last one is obviously this is where the person is wow the whole time, but not really listening to anything that's being said. So language learning is best done in context. By now, that is the big thing for us. It's not an isolated rule-based activity. This means that specific language study items, tenses, parts of speech are part of a text that learners are. So, I mean, there's lots of things that a learner needs to learn when it comes to grammar, past tense, indirect speech, synonyms, antonyms. What we are saying is that that can only be taught if it's part of a text, okay? And then how else can they learn? That by producing, either by speaking or writing, or by encountering, by listening or reading. Okay, so now you need to look at. Now, for those of you who work through semester one, I think you might be familiar with Krashen. He's a theorist that's given us a lot of insight into the first edition of language classrooms. So Krashen mentioned last semester, but I'll mention it to you again, comprehensible input and output provided. There must be comprehensible input provided and output provided for our learners to thrive in a language classroom. So how do we do this? You need to provide suitable pre-reading, pre-listening, and pre-reading activities before learners listen, or before learners listen to or read a book, read a story. So pre-reading, pre-listening, you've heard the words about prior knowledge. That is what he actually means. There must be those activities, because if there's no activities like that, you wouldn't know what your learners know. Remember, we always say that learners do not come with nothing into their classroom. They have an idea of certain things, and you need to test what they know. Okay. When they understand in the target language, they are exposed to comprehensible input. So what does that mean? It means when they understand it in the target language. So these are first additional language students, okay? So the target language for them would not necessarily be their first language. So when they understand in the target language, they're exposed to comprehensible input. And this is what Krashen says. And he says, and then they are able to hear or read a story with understanding. And how does this comprehensible input look like? So, for example, the student comes with comprehensible input into the classroom. So that would be their prior knowledge. You understand? So what you then need to do is to look at the comprehensible input and add +1. So in the classroom, you're going to add one additional thing that they need to learn. Okay, so if you have a situation where that's the ideal, where it's comprehensible input +1. So another word for the I would be your current level of competence. Okay, so they come in with a current level of competence, but you just need to add an additional information to that, language information to that. Obviously, if you're going to look at the I +0, it means that they're coming in, but you are not teaching them anything additional. If you have the comprehensible input or the level of competence +2, it means that you are giving them too much. Okay, so comprehensible, anything that makes input comprehensible helps language acquisition. Okay, so that's the basic. So again, here the importance of prior knowledge. I think I've mentioned pre-reading, pre-listening, that's all prior knowledge. You need to test that. And then without necessary prior knowledge, students cannot learn new things. It's true. Okay. And then learning is a process of making sense of new information by applying existing understanding to new experiences and ideas. And then academic learning. So let me just stop with that one. I normally go to schools as a PGCE school-based learning observer, lecturer for the university. And I remember one of the students did a poem. So I was observing her. She's a 4th year student, PGCE student. And the poem that she was presenting was on death. You know, it was about funerals. And what the student teacher then did was to ask students about their experiences or how their cultures differ when it comes to funerals. And I have to tell you, the prior knowledge gained from that was astounding, because what came from it is, because South Africa is such a diverse group of students, is that students from different cultures, the Muslim culture, Christianity, some people from Hinduism, they could explain then how their rituals of a funeral takes place. Immediately, she captured the students' attention because their voices were heard. The student then, the teacher realized that my students are coming in with a lot of prior knowledge. And so she has taken that, the prior knowledge or the whatever they came with, and then she added a bit of one new information to it. And that's essentially what we mean. So the importance of prior knowledge is essential. Without necessary knowledge, students cannot learn new things. So you have to look at their prior knowledge. Learning is a process of making sense of new information by applying existing to new experiences and ideas. So that is, you are applying the existing understanding that they have already to new experiences and ideas. And how do they do that? Academic learning will not be meaningful. So this is academic learning. What your learners are going to experience in the classroom will not be meaningful unless embedded in learning activities that build the learner's prior knowledge. Okay, so in academic classroom, that is what we are going to look at. Okay, now I'm not going to do this graph because I find that it's just confusing, but to learn, students need to do something. So this graph essentially is saying is that sometimes students learn by observing, they learn by abstract learning concepts, by concrete experiences, and by active learning activities. Okay, so they need to learn this way. So let's go further. And then grammar rules. I just need to move my face away from this. Yeah. Are grammar rules comprehensible input and output? Yeah, are they? What do you think? Okay, so these are grammar rules. Rule number 1, a complete sentence must include a noun and a verb. That's a rule. Okay, the bird flew. Then there's another rule, rule number 2. A complete sentence must include a subject and a predicate. Yes, the angry bird flew quickly across the sky. So yes, that's another rule. Rule number 3, the only exception to the above rule is the imperative sentence, go away. So there's all these rules, and we are saying, no, you can't teach it that way. It needs to be taught. Grammatical explanations and rules are not comprehensible input. Okay, nothing interesting about rules about parts of speech or third person singular or reported speech or active and the passive voice or prepositions. None of it is interesting. Your students are going to get bored. So rules are never heard outside a classroom, a language classroom. And that's so true. We're never going to learn when you speak to somebody outside the classroom about the rules of subject, verb, concord, for example, that he is and we are. You know, you will have to learn it a different way. So how would we? So traditionally grammar-based teaching, how was that done? It was done. So the traditional, the old system. Research shows that knowledge of grammar rules is very fragile and is rapidly forgotten. That's what Prashant says. It's very, yes, you can teach them the rules. Yes, there may be a part of it, but it's easily forgotten. Okay. And again, we talk about, I think, those of you who were registered for semester 1 will remember this iceberg where they say, you know, the top level of the ice is standing, the iceberg, the top section is a very small section of it, and obviously underneath the water is where the real knowledge lies. So traditional instruction, which is focused on grammar and output, focuses on the tip of the iceberg. Okay, whatever tip that traditional instruction manages to construct is quick to melt. It's quick to melt. So yes, traditional instruction with its focus on grammar and output focuses on the tip, only the top section of the iceberg. Whatever tip that tradition instruction manages to construct is quick to melt. So it's quickly, you're going to teach it to them, but it's quick to melt. It's going to disappear very quickly. Okay, and then we're just having there the Karate Kid saying rules do not work. Okay, so Cummins' iceberg models, for those of you who are registered for the first time, Cummins is also a theorist, and he speaks about 2 things. He speaks about the basic language proficiency, that's BICS, and he calls it surface level learning. So that would be similar to what you see on top of the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg. Okay, we go back. Surface language learning. So he says there's 2 things. There's called BICS. This is what it looks like. And he says Cummins' iceberg model of language interdependence. So your cognitive domain, when it comes to BICS, you will learn, and BICS is called basic interpersonal communication skills. So you will maybe learn cognitive knowledge, comprehension, application. You will learn language processes, so you will learn pronunciation, vocabulary, grammar, and so it's immediately apparent stuff, okay? But in order, so BICS does not really give us calc proficiency. And what is calc proficiency? Calc proficiency is called cognitive academic language proficiency. This is where your student will eventually learn information, grammar, language from you, but they will have a deeper cognitive academic language proficiency after you've taught them that way. And so they will learn about semantics and functioning, meaning, those things that are not immediately apparent, okay? So how do we acquire CALP? CALP is language. CALP is when you need language for reasoning, problem solving, and general academic achievement. Remember, BICS, yes, BICS is the top of the iceberg, but if you look at that diagram again, you know, CALP is at the bottom, and you need CALP for reasoning, for problem solving, and academic achievements. Now, how to acquire CALP? How do they acquire CALP? Learners need extensive vocabulary. It cannot be the vocabulary that BICS provides. They need extensive vocabulary. They need a deep understanding of the relevant concepts. And then finally, they need knowledge of how to decontextualize academic language. And that can only happen when you have CALP. So CALP, so Cummins' iceberg theory says there, the top section, you know, tip of the iceberg, that's what they call BICS is context embedded. Okay, so the language necessary. So this is context embedded language, is language necessary for day-to-day living, including conversation with friends. It is informal interaction, whereas CALP would be context reduced. So fewer nonverbal cues, and the language is more abstract. And that is really what we want from our learners. So CALP would be the language necessary to understand and discuss content in the classroom. So you're not going to get that via BICS. BICS would be just knowing the basics, you know, the basic grammar rules. CALP is where there is there's fewer nonverbal cues. It's more used when the student needs to do problem solving and critical thinking, etc. Okay. Now, what is input processing? So how are we going to input? Remember what Krashen says is that we need to give students, we have to take their prior knowledge and then add something additional so that, and how are we going to do that? And he calls it input processing. Remember, there's input processing, etc., etc. So learners, he says that learners must be pushed into processing input for it to become part of their linguistic system. So how do we do that? You need to immerse these learners in textbooks and in newspapers. You need to expose them to a range of grammatical structures and words, which gives them comprehensible input. So this is how you're going to have to do it. You can't do it by just giving them the language grammar rules. You have to use it by using, you need to immerse them. I love the word immersing because it really explains to you that the importance of these texts and books and newspapers, because this is what they are going to have to deal with in their day-to-day world, whether it's in the schooling system, whether it's going to be with other subjects, whether it's going to be in their career. They are not just going to have to know the grammar rules, but they must be able to apply them. How are they going to learn the rules via text? And then they will be able to apply it differently. And remember, texts are broad. I mean, you can use anything basically. Okay, so if we are going to look at the comprehensible input umbrella, you can look at picture talk, you can look at movie talk, you can read and discuss, it can be context-based instruction, it can be listen and draw. So there are different ways of going about it. So here we have a lovely picture of Einstein, and Einstein said this: never memorize what you can look up in a book. Okay, I will look up in books. And that's very true. So structured input processing for proficiency, this will be this. So remember we said here that input must be pushed. So you need to immerse your learners in texts and books, etc. And then he says that structured input processing for proficiency, this is how you can go about it. Research indicates that learners' proficiency improves when teachers encourage discussions about grammatical items that learners have read, whether they've heard or spoken. Okay, so, and they push learners to process these by means of structured input processing. So this is a very learner-centered classroom. Okay, so essentially what we are saying is that yes, you take into consideration the prior knowledge and then you push them to learn something new, okay? But this must be done by a structured input processing way. So that will mean a learner-centered classroom. And how do we go about that? Now, what is input processing? Input processing occurs when learners discuss language forms with understanding. So they're not just discussing the rule, they're discussing it with understanding. They're during socially significant interaction. And this is what you need to implement within your classroom. So there are, of course, grammar rules. That's important, but essentially, those things are important, but more important is the comprehensible input that you are going to give them. So here is a task of how you can use what they call text-based instruction in your classroom, more communicative-based, more inductive ways of looking at your classroom. You can look at a task or instruction, and this is what it would read. We're just giving you examples. You can, for example, read the past dates provided. So there will, maybe you can read past dates, 3 past dates of something, you know, so it's today would be the 1st of August. Okay, so the past dates provided 2023. Read past dates provided, or you can say the 1st of August 2022, etc., or the whatever you give it to them. Decide on which of the dates you and your family moved into the house. So you are going to decide a date that your family actually moved into a house. Okay, so this is just an instruction. Yes, a few examples of houses, and then use a correct address or use any address. So they're going to write down firstly a date that they've moved into a house. Then the next thing they're going to look at an address date. So you can use your own address. And then after that, they're going to write a sentence stating where you live and when you moved into the house. So this is how it's going to be. And then use the word since in your sentence. So here the students actually have to do the work. Okay, so the first thing is that they needed to read past dates. So a past date would have been July 2023. Decide on which of the dates you and your family moved into the house. So they've decided that it is July 2023. Use your correct address or use an imaginary any address. Here you can use 23 Key Road. You can use your address. Write a sentence stating where you live and when you moved into your home, and use the word since in your sentence. And this is how you can use a task where there is not really a rule a grammar rule that they have to follow, but they are actually doing the work, etc. So the sentence will look like, since we moved into our new home at 23K Road in July 2023, we have walked to school. So there's a lot of things that they have done on their own. They had to decide on a date. They had to decide on an address. Now you ask them to add the word since, and then you say to them, we have walked to school. Okay. So have walked is an important. Now what they can do afterwards is to read your sentence to the class. They can read the sentence to the class and then read a passage in which the present perfect tense is used. So this is how you're going to maybe teach them about the present perfect tense. Okay. So for example, the present perfect tense will be there. We have walked. Okay. Remember, we have is plural. So have will be we, subject plural, the verb will always be have. Okay. And then walked. If it's singular, it would be she has walked. So this is how an interesting way of teaching it. So now we're going to look at an example 1, how to actually teach the present perfect tense has and have. Okay. So this is an activity. Learners construct sentences containing information about where they live. We've just given you an example, how long they've lived there, another example. Okay, then can also choose to stay in. If they want to, they don't have to. They can choose maybe an imaginary place. It doesn't have to be their place specifically. The materials that you are going to use as a teacher might just be a picture of house. Okay. And then you're going to guide them. And then 3 random past dates so that you can also then give them, and they can choose when they have actually moved into the house. So this would be a present tense, perfect tense activity. So you have a sentence. Okay. So this is what the activity will be like. Since we moved into our new home at 23K Road in July 2023, we have walked to school. Okay. So how does that? The rule is, obviously, present perfect tense, has or have. Okay. John has started his homework. So that's the rule. They have fixed the broken window. Remember, when it's singular, it normally is has. If it's plural, it will be have. That's the rule. But now you are teaching the rule in a very different way, because now they can apply the rule in different situations. So since 6 months have passed since then. So you have the activity. Since we moved into our new home at 23K Road in July 2023, we have walked to school. So now the passage that they can add to it is that 6 months have passed since then, since moving into the house. Okay, so Sino has exercised every day and has lost 15 kilograms and has bought new clothes. Can you see how they are applying the present perfect tense with this activity, this passage? But it's not rule-based. They had to decide the date that they've moved in, the learners. They had to decide the address, etc. And they also had to decide about the way walking. So then from there, you can now just add and teach them the present and the present perfect tense. Okay, so here it goes. He has changed his diet. He only eats vegetables, fruit, and fish. Sino has made new friends and has spent time helping others. Although he has been busy, Sino has been making time to continue his PGCE studies. Okay, so that's just an example. So the inductive method for grammar teaching, preposition use. So inductive means discovery method. You know, how will they discover it? So this is how you're going to go about it. So you can look at inductive teaching is a method of logical reasoning based on observation of examples leading to discovery of the general rule. So we're not giving them the general rule. They are going to discover the rule. Always use real text and or pictures in the language study lesson. So for example, in this picture, okay, so prepositions, where's the hat? They're going to discover, you can ask them, where's the hat? It's on top of his head. Okay, so that's how they learn, on. Okay, that's how they learn something new. Okay, so again, there you can use her earrings is on her ears. Again, you are teaching them, you're showing them the picture, and you can ask them about the earrings. Where will you find her earrings? You know, it's on her ears, etc. Example, this is the example, using pictures to learn about preposition use. So you show them the picture, they look at it, they discover via themselves, by looking at the picture, how to teach prepositions or understand prepositions, in other words. Okay, so here's a very good example that you can also use. It's now just a pity it's not bigger, but this is a box, prepositions of place. So you have a box and then you have a ball. So when the ball, you'll see the first picture, there's the ball is in the box. So it's the ball will be in the box. Then you have another thing, and then the ball will be on the box. And then there's another picture, the ball is under the box, and then there's another picture, the ball is next to the box, etc. Can you see how visuals can play an important role when teaching these preposition activities? Because this is how they're actually going to learn it and remember it. Okay, let's go first again there. preposition use, practice use. Where are the hats? Where are hats worn? Okay, it's on a head, on the where are hats stored? It's normally in a cupboard or a wardrobe or whatever. Where do you buy your hat? You buy a hat at a store. Where would you not leave hats? You might not leave hats in a fridge, for example. So there we have in, okay, at. You have where hats stored, okay, in a cupboard. Where are hats worn? On. Okay, so that's how you can teach it. The same thing with these pictures here. You can just be creative and use the same example, okay, etc. Okay, now another example that in teaching another form of language would be using pictures to learn about adjectives. Same principle applies. You can write down names of 5 objects or abstract nouns in the picture, and then you can look, these are different pictures there that you can look at, and then write down adjectives to describe the noun. You know what I mean? So an adjective would be the cricket, the player. Okay, an adjective to describe the noun, it would be a cricket player, for example. Okay, so the noun will be maybe the man, or sorry, the cricket player, sorry, the player, and then the adjective would be the cricket player. And then write a paragraph using the adjective to describe the noun selected. So there it's again, they have to write it. So wintertime, you can use pictures to teach verbs, adjectives, and nouns. Yeah, different pictures that you can use, and that you can use to teach these adjectives, nouns. Now, example 3, using pictures to learn about sentence construction. Again, another example. Look at the illustration and describe what was happening. Okay, look at these. You can just give them these pictures and you can tell them, illustrate what's happening there. Okay, subscribe it. The description would be the athlete ran over the finish line first, and the others were trying to catch up with him. Now change the statement into a question using what, why, when, and where. These are just examples that we are giving you. What about language errors? You can use language errors also to teach them how to in the language classroom. So in writing, instead of writing out the correct form of the errors, teachers make use of a reference number system. So this is just one way you can go about it. I personally think it's so tedious. It just feels a lot to deal with, but I think it's something that you need to know. So you will underline errors and write numbers referring to the grammatical explanation and rules. So how we do it. Learners refer to the explanations once they understand the reasons for the errors they correct. Okay, so again, let me go through that again. What about language errors? In writing, instead of writing out the correct form of errors, okay, teachers, so normally when I do a marker script and then they spelled a word incorrectly, I would underline it. Sometimes I would write the correct word or the sentence structure is not correct. That's what we do, but this is just a way of going about it, how to deal with language errors, and that will be to underline errors and write numbers referring to grammatical explanation and rules. And how do we go about that? Learners can also ask peers who can either confirm they have corrected the errors or explain why they think it is still corrected. So we're going to give you an example of that. So here's an example. So yesterday, the man panicked. You know, panicked is spelled incorrectly. When he see, that's obviously wrong. When he should have been different. When he saw there was too little time left. Too is spelled incorrectly. It should be a double O. So there are 3 mistakes. In the margin, you have 7, you have 12.4, and then you have 9. Okay. So example 7. So this is how you can do it. 7, the rule says for verbs ending in C, add K when suffixes beginning with a vowel are added. So that's just the rule. Then 12.4, which would be your next one in the margin. The simple, so that would be, the first one would be panicked. The second one will be C. The simple past tense describes the action that has happened at some time in the past. So that rule means that it cannot be see, it now needs to be he saw. And then the last rule, which would be number 9, to and to. Okay, so he went to town. That's a preposition. He went to. That means adverb of degree. I want to do it. Okay, so that's part of the infinitive, to do. So those are just the explanations of why the rules. The learners will then read the explanations, correct the written texts, consult with peers, and rewrite the text. Okay, so yesterday they will rewrite it and say, yesterday the man panicked when he saw there was too little time left. Okay, so that's correct. And then how to ensure learners are ready to learn. So that's now the previous section would just be examples that we've given, how you can teach your students, for example, the present perfect tense. We also looked at how you can teach them prepositions. We looked at, for example, how you can teach them about adjectives, verbs, etc. How you can even teach them in terms of correcting their errors. So these are inductive ways where the answers is not just given to them. They have to explore it, by looking at the pictures, for example. So how to ensure learners are ready to learn. So this is a totally new section. Ensure learning activities and outcomes are achievable. That's very important. Remember what Krashen says, that, and I'm going to go back to him, he says that comprehensible input, so the competence of the learner, you must figure out where they are, so that can be done via prior knowledge, plus you must add one additional knowledge element. I don't know any other word to explain it to you, but I hope you understand what I'm saying. So ensure learning activities and outcomes. This will be achievable outcomes. Okay, so if you give them too much, it will not be achievable. If you give them nothing, they're going to be bored. So it must be outcomes that are achievable. Then help learners to understand what they need to learn. Then you need to help them, to understand. So you need to be very clear with your teaching style in order to make them understand. And how can you help them? You can help them by scaffolding them, by mediation. Like, for example, bringing in pictures or text, etc. Okay, or you can relate learning to learners' everyday experiences. I always do that. One of the students were teaching, as I observed a student yesterday, for example, and she was teaching about a midterm break. And the midterm break was a very interesting poem, because the topic of the poem was extremely different from the actual wording in the poem. But she used the midterm break and she asked them, what do they do, and etc., etc. So they would then say, okay, but what if someone dies during your midterm break? How will you feel? And so that's how she started the poem, because the poem was about a boy that was on his midterm break, and then he discovered that his brother has died. And yes, it was a very interesting way of looking at it. So this is how learners could then relate to learner everyday experiences. And then structure learning, so learners can experience initial success, okay, and develop a positive attitude to learning. This is very, very important. That's the way of going about it, okay? Deliberately making learners interesting, enjoyable, and challenging. Yep, absolutely. One of my students, excuse me for bringing them up, but I do the observations, and I always find these interesting things that some of my student teachers use. And one of the things within the poem that you mentioned was that there was a bell ringing, and what was interesting, and then she brought in the sound of a bell, and immediately when the students heard that sound, they knew that this bell was actually about death, because you could hear the intensity, because different bells ring for different reasons, but that sound immediately made them realize, and then they read, but ma'am, that is normally when death happens or something is scary, then you hear that particular bell. So that made those students, so it was the learning was interesting, it was enjoyable, and it was challenging. And it made me happy as a lecture observer. Okay, so how to ensure learners are ready to learn? Use learning activities that provoke curiosity so that learners are encouraged to ask why, how, what if. In the classroom throughout the lesson, the students, when they heard the bell, she brought in pictures, visuals into the classroom. And the questions that came from the learners were actually quite astonishing. I was so surprised because they wanted to know, but why, ma'am? How, ma'am? What if, ma'am? And that is really what you want. Okay, the students need to enjoy learning. And how are they going to enjoy learning? You need to consider knowledge. You need to consider their skills and attitude that learners bring with them into the classroom. Learners bring a lot of prior knowledge with them into the classroom. So you need to consider that, the knowledge, the skills, and the attitudes. You also need to develop understanding of concepts and principles. You need to develop an understanding of concepts and principles rather than recall of factual information, remember, or development of routine skills. You know, remember what Einstein said? It's senseless to memorize something that you can look up into in a book. But when you are teaching them in a way where they develop understanding of concepts and principles rather than recall of factual information or the development of routine skills, it's always better. Like the examples we've given you in terms of how to teach the present perfect tense. It's not a rule that we say to them. We show them a picture and we ask them. They are discovering the answers via looking at the visuals, for example. Okay, so just in one thing to remember. So this is an example here. Hello, students. Let's start our lesson. She will make us repeat again and again. Oh, repeat 10 times a different food taste, and then the students will just get so bored. They will say salty, sweet, bitter, sour. Yes, I mean salty, sweet, bitter, sour. They're not learning anything because it's not text-based. There's no visual elements involved. When they leave that classroom, they're most probably going to forget most of it. Okay, so let's go on. So consider learners' diverse and linguistic background. And that's what I think my student teacher did well with the funeral poem, the poem on funerals, where she delved into the reality. She understood the reality that she is sitting with a diverse group of students in this classroom. And if they can just express how within their culture or language group or linguistic group they experience funerals, she's gonna get a lot of interesting information. And that's exactly what happened because she considered their cultural and linguistics background. Okay, so text-based approaches are for language teaching and learning. So this will be text-based approaches. What types of media could you use in your language classroom? You can use media. You can use newspapers, the internet, television, radio, magazines, anything that has a text attached to it. Okay, so next one, what type of text could you use in your language? You could use in your language classrooms. You can use, for example, this is media. So media will be your newspapers, the internet, radio, television, magazines. The text could be a persuasive text, you know, so you can use of a debate, an argument, editorial. You can use a text that's informative. You can use a text that's imaginative. There are so many of it. So an informative text would be a directory, a calendar, a thesaurus, procedure, anything else. An imaginative text would be a novel, poetry, story. So there are lots of media that you can use, and there are lots of text that you can use. Okay, so what visual material could you use in your language classroom? Remember, we're big on bringing in visual material. Okay, so this is an example of a visual, you know, the Lay's chips. And then what are some visual text elements that you can see here in this advertisement? You can look at the color, you can look at the images, look at the images there. There's two girls actually wrapping, trying to push together Lay's chip, and there's actually two on a motorbike, and there's people climbing on. So what are the color, the images, the words that you see in the text, the font that they are using, the font size, the layout, the content, and what's the purpose? So this is going to be part of your SS1. And I'm going to do a lot more with you in terms of helping you with your SS1. Because what is going to be required of you, and I'm just going to do this very briefly because I'm going to focus more on the other understanding, is that I'm going to focus on possibly what media you can use for your SS1, what will the text that you are going to be able to use, and what visuals are you going to bring in. So we'll talk a little bit about this later on, but this is an interesting way of going about it. And then text-based approaches for language teaching. Okay, so so you can look at what is the purpose and the audience for each text selected, you know, what's the purpose they are playing, you know, and what's the audience. The audience would obviously be people that are watching sport, etc. Yep, we can do it. Tomato. This one is also quite, no one grows ketchup like Heinz. I mean, that's very interesting because they're essentially showing us how many tomatoes they have in an actual bottle. Very interesting text that you can use, for example. And the last one, I don't want a perfect life, I want a happy life. No one grows ketchup like Heinz, okay? And then how do we go about it? Scaffolding. Remember, scaffolding, I said, is helping, mediating learning, helping, where learners is supported and guided, learning is being mediated. So you need to provide examples, for examples in your paragraph, keywords and tenses, okay? And then asking questions, this is how you can go about it. When you're scaffolding, giving templates, you can providing criteria, you can either show how to classify something, you can find key points, making lists, reading instructions. So these are all things that you scaffold to support your students. So how do we scaffold? We can providing examples in a paragraph. We can ask questions, we can give templates, we can provide criteria, we can showing how to classify, we can find key points, we can tell them to make lists, how to read the instructions, and then also skimming and scanning strategies. Okay, so what strategies could you teach learners to use to develop, for example, the apostrophe use, verb agreement, or concord direct speech? So you need to look at ways how you are going to do that. You need to describe 3 text-based activities for learners to acquire 1 grammar-focused concept. There's an example of a chocolate, but we'll go into more detail with that later on. So what are we expecting next would be language acquisition does not require extensive use of conscious grammatical rules. Remember, we've said this, and I'm emphasizing this. Language acquisition does not require extensive use of conscious grammar rules and does not require tedious drills. And this is what Krashen says. This is his motto. And then prioritize fun and the learning will come. Okay, thank you. I will see you next week. And then I'm just going to sign out.